Every few years, a talent competition produces a moment that genuinely stops the world in its tracks. Sometimes it is a voice that defies all expectations. Sometimes it is a performer whose energy is simply impossible to look away from. But in June 2018, America's Got Talent delivered something that television had rarely seen before. A 13-year-old girl from a small town in England walked onto one of the biggest stages in the world and sang with a voice so powerful, so raw, and so completely unexpected, that it left 4 seasoned judges utterly speechless. That girl was Courtney Hadwin, and within a single night, she became a global sensation. What nobody told her, however, was that the same fame that made her would eventually become the very thing that nearly destroyed her. The audition aired on June 12, 2018. Courtney walked onto the stage looking like any other nervous teenager, fidgeting and barely able to make eye contact with the judges. She openly admitted to being plagued by stage fright, and her voice was so quiet during her introduction that Mel B had to physically encourage her just to begin. She had chosen Otis Redding's Hard to Handle, a classic soul track that demands confidence, swagger, and an almost reckless commitment to the moment. What followed was one of the most extraordinary transformations in talent show history. The moment she opened her mouth, the shy teenager disappeared entirely. Her voice was enormous, her movement electric, and her stage presence so far beyond her years that nobody in the room quite knew how to process what they were watching. She dropped to her knees mid-performance, a moment that caused Simon Cowell to exclaim under his breath in disbelief. Howie Mandel immediately compared her to Janis Joplin. Mel B looked as though she genuinely could not believe what she was witnessing. When the song ended, the entire audience rose to its feet. Howie Mandel did not hesitate. He walked straight to the golden buzzer and pressed it, sending Courtney directly to the live shows. Backstage, he declared that he had never been more excited in his entire career on the show, comparing her to season 12 winner Darcy Lynn Farmer and predicting that Courtney would be this year's champion. More than 11 million people watched the audition live on NBC, but the real impact came online. Within a single week, the video had been viewed over 130 million times across social media and streaming platforms. That number would eventually surpass 250 million views, making it one of the most watched auditions in the show's history. Courtney Hadwin was no longer just a shy teenager from England. She was a global phenomenon. As the season progressed, she continued to deliver breathtaking performances. In the quarterfinals, she tore through James Brown's Papa's Got a Brand New Bag and received standing ovations from all 4 judges. In the semifinals, she performed Steppenwolf's Born to Be Wild, screaming and dancing across the stage with a kind of primal energy that left Howie Mandel once again predicting she would win the whole competition. Simon Cowell called her a bundle of excitement, describing her as raw and messy in the best possible way. He said that watching her shake with nerves before a performance and then explode on stage was exactly why he loved her. In the finale, she performed alongside rock band The Struts before closing with Janis Joplin's Piece of My Heart. Every indicator pointed toward her winning the $1 million prize. She was the front runner. She had been from the very beginning. And then the results were announced. Courtney Hadwin finished in 6th place. The winner was close-up magician Shin Lim. The gasps that filled the Dolby Theatre when her name was called were reportedly deafening. Fans flooded Twitter in disbelief, calling the result absurd and expressing genuine shock that she had not even made the top 5. The girl who had been predicted to win from her very first audition was sent home without a trophy. But as shocking as that elimination was, what happened next proved to be far more difficult. Record deals arrived quickly after the finale. Simon Cowell, who had called her a lion on stage, partnered with Arista Records to sign Courtney to a multi-album deal. The announcement came in December 2018, just months after the show ended. Courtney was 14 years old and described herself as feeling incredibly lucky. Cowell publicly praised her as an amazing artist and expressed his excitement about working closely with her. Everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. Then, shortly before her 16th birthday, it all collapsed. Psycho Music and Arista Records both underwent severe structural changes. Psycho Music was winding down its operations entirely, leaving artists stranded without label support. The deal that was supposed to launch Courtney's career had simply folded. In interviews years later, she described the collapse as leaving her in a harder position than she had been in before America's Got Talent. She said she felt a constant, exhausting pressure to prove herself a little more every single day. What made the situation even more damaging was what had happened inside the label before it fell apart. Rather than developing the sound that had made Courtney famous, she was shuffled into writing sessions with pop-leaning songwriters and producers who had no understanding of her musical identity. She described being placed in large writing camps and handed songs she simply could not relate to at all. She called the music pure Ariana Grande pop, and said clearly that it just was not her. The music that had made her famous was soul, blues, and rock and roll rooted in a completely different era. She had discovered her true musical self by watching black and white YouTube videos of James Brown, Tina Turner, Etta James, and Aretha Franklin. The moment she had realized what she wanted to do with her life was after watching James Brown perform I Got You, I Feel Good, in footage from decades past. That was her sound. The industry, however, wanted something else entirely, and in chasing it, they nearly erased everything that made her special. The turning point came when she was introduced to producer Kevin Bowe, a man with credits alongside Etta James and Joe Cocker, who genuinely understood the music Courtney loved. For the first time, she was encouraged to actually write, to contribute her own ideas and emotions rather than simply recording whatever was handed to her. It was a completely different creative process, one that required her to open up in ways she had never been asked to before. Songwriting had never come naturally to her. Her priority had always been the stage. But something shifted during her time with Bowe, and what had once felt impossible became something she could not live without. She began working on what would eventually become her debut album when she was approximately 15 years old, writing and rewriting over a period of years. That album, titled Little Miss Jagged, was finally released in September 2025. It was a product of nearly a decade of struggle, rejection, and painful creative rediscovery. While all of this was unfolding privately, a very public battle was being fought online. The same internet that had catapulted Courtney to global fame began to turn against her with a cruelty that was difficult to watch. Viewers dug up footage of her previous appearance on The Voice Kids UK in 2017, where she had performed with visible confidence and finished in the top 6. They compared that version of her to the trembling, Bella-speaking teenager who had stood before the America's Got Talent judges, and they drew a damning conclusion. The shyness, they claimed, was a performance. The nerves were fake. The entire audition had been manufactured to maximize shock value when she transformed on stage. The accusations spread across social media within hours. One post stated plainly that because she had been a finalist on a British competition, her entire act was fraudulent. What those commenters conveniently ignored was that America's Got Talent had no rule whatsoever against contestants with prior competition experience. Courtney had hidden nothing. She had broken no rules. But on the internet, facts rarely matter as much as the story people want to tell. Her grandfather, Tom Story, came to her defense publicly, explaining to the Daily Mail that the family had always believed American audiences would respond to her rock and roll energy in a way that British audiences had not, and that the decision to enter the American competition over the British one had been entirely strategic. He was right about the reception, but none of them could have anticipated the scale of the backlash that would follow. The bullying was not limited to strangers online. Even after becoming one of the most talked about young performers in the world, Courtney returned to her school in Hesleden, County Durham, and was mocked by her own classmates. They made fun of her voice and called her names. Her parents had feared this outcome from the beginning, knowing the kind of attention the spotlight could attract. But there is no real protection from the people you see every single day. Courtney later reflected that every hate comment and every sly remark hit her harder than she ever let anyone see. There were days, she admitted, when it made her question whether she wanted to be in the public eye at all. Between 2019 and 2022, she largely vanished from public life. Fans assumed she had walked away from music, but the truth was far more complicated. She was between 15 and 18 years old during this period, spending her teenage years not in classrooms or at parties, but navigating an industry that had discarded her once and left her to rebuild entirely on her own terms. She described those years as deeply challenging, acknowledging that she had faced constant pressure to prove she was more than just the girl from that television show. The sudden, enormous fame had carried a weight she had not been prepared for, and when the label's support disappeared, she was left to carry it entirely alone. She used those years to write, Songwriting had initially been something forced upon her by people who did not understand her. Over time, it became her most important tool for self-expression. She described herself as someone who struggled to talk about her feelings, and so the songs became the outlet. The tracks she wrote during those quiet years were not about fame or applause. They were about what happens when all of that disappears, and what you are left with when the world stops watching. When she finally emerged and released Little Miss Jagged in September 2025, she did so as an independent artist who had earned every word on the record. The album was her diary, her therapy, and the most honest creative work she had ever produced. One of its central songs, You Only Love Me When I Lie, was written specifically about the experience of being trapped by other people's image of you. She described it as coming from a place of pure frustration, rooted deeply in soul and blues, and as containing the rawest version of herself she had ever committed to tape. But even the album's release did not bring the clean resolution she might have hoped for. In June 2025, she performed at Festival VR in Portugal in an outfit that reflected the confident young woman she had become. The internet responded with over 200 mocking messages in a single day, accusing her of desperation and dragging up the same fake act accusations that had followed her since 2018. The cruelty only proved the point she had been making for years through her music. People wanted her frozen at 13, preserved exactly as they remembered her, and the moment she dared to show them who she had actually become, they refused to accept it. Courtney Hadwin spent years being told who to be, what to sing, and what to wear. She lost a record deal, survived years of relentless online abuse, and navigated the crushing weight of child stardom almost entirely without support. She did all of this while still a teenager, still figuring out who she was, still trying to hold on to the music that had always been her only real anchor. Little Miss Jagged is the sound of someone who refused to stay in the box that was built for her. It is the work of a woman who fought her way back, not to reclaim the fame she once had, but to finally, on her own terms, be heard.